think we have an exciting agenda for everyone today, so let's get started. Next slide, please. We just have a few housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded, and if you could please drop your name and organization into the chat, that would be very helpful in keeping track of everyone. And feel free also to drop any questions you may have into the chat during this presentation. And I'll pass it over to Watson.
Yeah, great. Welcome, everybody. Really excited to have this discussion today. Here's some of the faces from the project team here that are involved in the project. We're not going to have everybody introduce themselves individually in the for the sake of time here, but here are some of the faces. Myself and Yasna are the principal investigators. CalSTART and EPRI are partners on this project. And really excited about that. Andra Rogers is the project manager on the EPRI side and working with the CEC. Nate from CalSTART, and then Ken and Elizabeth are the ones that kind of make everything happen there. So really appreciate the work that everybody's doing here. Again, reach out. Our email, our contact information is here if you ever need to connect with any of us. On the next slide, we have a listing of all the folks that are part of this ITAC organization. So what's ITAC stand for? The Industry Technical Advisory Committee to the e-truck projects. So we're really excited to have so many people from all different walks of the industry as part of this, and really appreciate everyone's time to participate in this. Like Nate said, please type in your name and affiliation in the chat. It'd be great to, see where everybody's from, who's on the call, make those connections with everybody as part of the project here. And so I'll start talking about the agenda for today and a little bit of on the next slide here on what our goals are. This ITAC meeting, what we're really trying to do and accomplish in this is we want your comments, reactions, suggestions. So while we do have presentations and we're going to talk through a lot of that stuff, the goal at the end of the day is we want your reaction. We want to say, oh, that's great. Have you thought of this? We want that kind of feedback from folks as part of that project. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And one of the things we're doing to try and increase that, your ability to ask questions and comment and provide feedback is this is the first time we kicked off one of our ITAC meetings with a panel discussions. And so really appreciate the panel with Volterra, Terawatt, and Watt EV presenting here. Thank you for doing this. And we kind of want to connect that into, into the work we're doing with e-truck, and we're going to have different panel topics in future ITAC meetings. So again, that we're going to start integrating this, but again, as the message of we want your feedback. If you want to have it, if you think we should have a different panel discussion at our next ITAC meeting, please suggest that in the comments or reach out to Yasna or I on those kind of things. So today, I'll go through some introductions on where we are with the project. Cambridge Systematics, Sam's going to go through some of the work that they're doing on some of the surveys. The panel I mentioned earlier, and then we're going to go through some more e-truck updates where Ken and Liz are going to go through where things are and next steps. But again, we're trying to make this, open forum so that you can provide feedback, but we are going to present some stuff, but the presentations aren't intended to inhibit discussion. They're intended to be a starting point for taking the discussion further. So thanks so much for everybody's participation. I'll go on the next slide, just do quickly, what the project purpose is and so the e-truck project funded by the California Energy Commission and CalSTART and EPRI are the joint principals on this thing. We're trying to create this research hub and for heavy duty electric vehicle charging infrastructure across the state. So what's a research hub, right? That sounds kind of like a fancy word. Well, we have a portfolio of activities that fall under that research hub, from our work in the equity and workforce outreach and development and engaging with stakeholders there, from what we're going to talk about with Sam's doing a market needs assessment, but we're also doing some technology assessments. And so we'll talk a little bit about our work in that area. And then we're doing a research and development. So we're pushing the technology envelope and we're setting up a lab. And so we're doing R&D activities and work in that area. And then public charging corridor strategies. So we're going to have demonstration sites that help us understand what a statewide corridor strategy would be. So all these things, what's kind of, to me, always been the secret sauce of this project is a portfolio of activities that are all coming together. So thanks for everybody for being supportive, participating in this. On the next slide here, I think we have a little bit of the goals and objectives of the ITAC. Again, we have this objective for high power charging technology for zero emission trucks across the state. We're trying to expand that network and how we can be, help California achieve its goals and objectives. And so we have some technology objectives that we're trying to do. We're going to do some demonstrations along the way. And so again, it's a really great project. Again, the ITAC purpose is give us your reactions, give us your comments, give us your suggestions. If we're supposed to be listening and also pushing the technology envelope and the envelope of what's possible here. That's what we're trying to accomplish. So the next slide kind of highlights of what we're doing with our workforce activities and community activities. We've actually done some really cool partner presentations recently. One was on ZEV 101 and Charging Infrastructure 101. Both of those webinars, I believe, had well over 100, if not more, well over 100 participants in each of those sessions. Really well attended activities there. So those presentations, really great foundational work, reaching out into these community organizations. We've just published a couple of reports. There's a tier 1 supplier OEM perspectives on high power charging. That was one of the reports that was published. And now we have also industry perspectives on high power charging. This is from the EVSE companies. And again, I really appreciate that those are all based on interviews. So we did one-on-one interviews with a lot of organizations. We collected that information into these published reports. We're going to follow up pretty soon with synthesizing all that information together with additional reports that synthesize that information together and create a cohesive kind of like, I'll say it starts to put together a framework and a roadmap for where the industry is. But these are kind of like good summary documents on the activities that came out of those studies. And I think looks like Nate is posting a link to those reports in the chat. So appreciate that. And then we have this Advanced Transportation Research Center at SC's Pomona location. So we procured a pretty expensive set of test gear for the Pomona site, and so that equipment is just delivered, and we're now getting ready to set up this test gear. So what we'll be able to do? What's the purpose of this test gear? as all this trucks and infrastructure is coming to market to serve the specific industry segment, we're going to be dealing with higher power charges than what happens in the light duty vehicle space. This test site is intended to serve as a location where we can test this kind of thing, and equipment. So we'll be able to test for interoperability and a host of other things with this equipment that's available there. And again, appreciate the effort of Southern Cal Edison to be a host of that and funding a lot of the work there. And then we have pilot sites. 2 pilot sites are MHX and Travel Centers of America. I see Tony on the screen here. Thanks, Tony, for Travel Centers of America. And both of those sites are really moving, are actually hitting a point where they're becoming more than just a discussion, they're becoming real. MHX,
okay. Yeah, let me wrap this up. I'll make it out.
Oh, I'm sorry. The MHX site, we're moving into procurement phases of equipment for the MHX site. So that's really exciting. As everybody knows, with equipment lead times for things like switchgear and all that stuff, now that you have to get this equipment ordered. And so MHX is moving towards that phase. And I think Tony, what the Travel Centers of America, you're getting pretty close to that stage too. So
oh yes,
really,
we'll be spending 1.8 million within the next week or 2.
Okay, yeah. So this is really exciting that it's actually, these aren't things on paper now. These are actually getting ready to be physical projects that we'll be able to walk around and see and kick the tires on. And so that will be an exciting phase of when we're able to see the fruits of a lot of the efforts from our partners and everyone involved there. So we'll have we're pursuing an MCS hardware for one of these sites. And so we hope to be, an early deployment location for some MCS hardware. And so that's our, that's a pretty exciting step that we're after and pursuing. So with that, I think the next part is for Sam to talk about the Fleet Industry Outreach Survey findings. But I'll just pause for a minute if anybody on the project team has comments or questions or anything to clarify things I said there. Anything to?
No, that was a good overview. This is Yasna. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to add, or I answered in chat, the slides will be available on our ITAC website, as well as the full recording of this meeting. So you're free to look at these slides, as well as all the quarterly meetings of the ITAC. And we encourage, in between the meetings, always engagement, questions, and conversations, input, feedback from the ITAC. You are a committee that's important to be engaged and to make sure the project stays and does relevant things to the overall industry.
Great. So Sam, I'll turn it over to you and you can share your slides. And
great. Thank you so much, Watson and Jasnik, for giving me the opportunity to present on our fleet needs survey findings. So first, I wanted to start with the project team we're working with on this study. So Cambridge Systematics, we are the prime consultant leading the outreach and some of the data development to support the eTruck study. We are working with Southern California Association of Governments to help facilitate our outreach efforts. Also on our team is CR Associates, ICF, Red Hill Group, Tioga, and Berkeley Labs. So all of us together have worked together on outreaching to stakeholders, the fleets, as well as focus groups. to try to get a better understanding of what's going on in the current status of fleet needs within we're focused mostly on California, but there was a bit of a focus on Southern California for some of our surveying and some of our outreach efforts as the first part of this phase is going on. So this project has 3 phases that we're doing. We started with a literature review. We're in the middle of our outreach program where we're just completing that. There's a technical phase where we're working out large models and working on that data to try to figure out a better understanding of where trucks are going, where they are, and exactly how they move. With commodities involved. And this will end into a identification of locations to help build a regional roadmap for a heavy duty and medium duty charging. So hopefully our work can help lead to a really well-defined roadmap and some steps on how we can get there. Today, I'm going to focus on the outreach and the survey that we conducted. So we've done a number of surveys to date. We have over 100 surveys taken from professional truckers. Our team went through phone interviews with each of these trucking fleets, talking to operations managers at their sites or on their team to get a better understanding of how their fleets are dealing with the transition to zero emissions vehicles. So we had those administered via phone. We also conducted 11 one-on-one interviews with public and private stakeholders. Those who build, install, and actually operate some of these zero emission vehicles, as well as other parties that either facilitate that to happen, property owners, ports, and others who are very much involved in how this industry will transition to the zero emissions future. We also held 3 focus groups that brought together agencies and other quasi-government groups and universities and other academic centers to better understand what are the overall elements we should be thinking about. Obviously, we're talking about also criteria for siting potential sites in the future. So just getting a better understanding of all the different variables, the constraints and challenges that we're going to be facing as we go through this roadmap, and how we can make this easier for everybody as we transition. So I'm going to go over the survey results that we received from those over 100 that we surveyed throughout the process. So just getting a better understanding of the kind of fleet sizes we're dealing with. If you can look at the graph on the left, you'll see that we're dealing with fleet sizes ranging from 1 to 4, 5 to 10, 11 to 50, 50 to 100, and 100 plus. So we want to get a broad range of different fleet sizes because we get an understanding of the unique challenges for each one of these different fleet sizes and how we can best prepare them as this transition moves forward. Additionally, on top of trying to better understand the fleet sizes, we want to understand the industries they're involved in and ensuring that we have a spread throughout different industries, as it will take a number of different industries pulling in the same direction to ensure that we have this transition to a zero emissions future. Not surprisingly, the people that we talked to, obviously this is a little bit focused in Southern California, but went beyond that, as you'll see in the next slide. But trucking, in terms of trucking industry that we were talking to, specifically transportation and warehousing were the vast majority, followed by construction and other. So there, we use NCS codes to help define which bucket these industries were involved in, and they help self-identify exactly who they were. We also wanted to understand what were the common destinations. Obviously, we're dealing with trucking manufacturers and warehousing. So not surprisingly, warehouses and distribution centers, the ports, retail outlets, manufacturing, and truck terminals were the most common destinations we saw these trucks going to. But it really did give us a better understanding of where they're going, where they're coming from, and a better understanding of who the fleets we were dealing with. Additionally, we wanted to understand where they were traveling and where their base of operations were and their primary travel areas, so we can better understand as we move into the next phase, who are we talking to and where are they traveling to? Within our survey field, we saw over 50% of the people we surveyed were within Southern California. All of them operated within the state of California, but some of them also had operations outside of California specifically. There were some national groups as well as some others that traveled along the West Coast, all the way up to Canada, and others that went over the way out to the Southeast in terms of getting all the way down into Texas, New Mexico. So there was a spread, but the majority of those who participated were focused specifically in California, majority of Southern California, but all of them well within California. So it gave us a good confidence about who we were talking to and that these results were reflective of those fleets within California. We also wanted to understand how their travel operated throughout the day and how their operations may be changing over time, but we wanted to get a good understanding of how they operated today. So we understood how many truck stops they're going to be making and the overall mileage that they were going per day. These two factors will be really important as we really start thinking about the overall model and how we're going to apply it and how we're going to do some level of fleet segmentation to better understand where people are traveling by fleet size, by how many stops, and their overall operations throughout the day. So these pieces of information will be utilized not only to understand where they are now, but how we're going to build those into the model. And now we're starting to want to ask questions about how are they transitioning, what are their plans so far, and what have they done to date to prepare for that transition. So we did want to ask when would you likely start this transition of your vehicles? The majority of people are focused on doing this transition over time, with a lot of them thinking about the replacement of their vehicle only after the economic life. This might also be a case of the fact that we pulled so many or interviewed so many smaller fleets. We'll have a breakdown of that as we go through the report. But overall, we're seeing that there is a phased replacement, and we're seeing that they are hopefully starting before 2025. So in process now and moving forward until the regulations are through. We also wanted to understand where they were in terms of different steps in their planning efforts. So have they established a plan? Are they doing budgets? Have they secured funding? So we asked this to all the fleets, and the majority of them, unfortunately, have not completed any of the above elements that we have talked about. But it was reassuring to see that a number of them, regardless of fleet size, have actually participated in a number of these elements, showing that regardless of size, there is a process of people moving forward or fleet sizes moving forward with the planning of zero emissions trucks. So they might not be at the completed project phase or the starting construction phase, but a lot of them have started to think about it. They're establishing plans and budgets, even in some of the smaller fleets that we've seen. But overall, there's still a lot of work to be done to get them into this planning phase and get them into the process of the zero emissions transition. We also want to understand who have they talked to, how are they going about this? And what we've noticed from the feedback is that they've first talked to the OEMs, the developers of the actual equipment first in terms of the trucks, and more of them have talked to them about how to purchase and the use of trucks, more so than the conversations with utilities about the installation of charging facilities at their sites. So this could be both a combination of just the planning process overall, maybe wanting to establish a vehicle first before you think about charging. Additionally, as we've talked about, the number of smaller fleets may not be thinking of putting depots on site, so they're just focused on the purchase of vehicles and potentially reliance on more of the public charging facilities that are also developed in the future. To kind of build into that one, we also did ask how likely were you to build charging on site, and you can see a vast majority actually believe they're either very likely or somewhat likely to build on site. There was still a substantial amount that were uncertain. Obviously, we're still in early phases, so there's a lot of work to be done there. And then there was another grouping that was very unlikely, and those ones we can see reflected in a lot of our smaller fleets, which isn't surprising when you're talking about 1 to 4 or even under 10. To bring that kind of infrastructure on site is a high cost. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we kind of review over some of the other engagement themes we heard from both our focus groups and interviews. And then we wanted to talk about kind of the barriers to the zero emission future. We wanted to get a better understanding of where they saw these challenges. So some of the biggest challenges that we saw that we heard in terms of feedback were the range limitations, the actual cost of purchasing the vehicle, and then lastly, some of the grid readiness that they were concerned about in terms of having either public facilities ready or being able to bring energy on site for their private depots. We also want to get a better understanding of what they were thinking about in terms of different types of fuels and overall how they were picturing this overall transition. The majority of them were looking at electric charging as their transition for the future. So I feel like we're on a very good path there. Another one that was mentioned was hydrogen, and then multiple others thought it might take both or multiple types of fuels and charging or alternative fuels to be able to for them to transition their fleets all over. And then there is still a large number that don't know. So as we continue to go through this process will know that education and including specific outreach to a number of different fleets will be really important as we continue this transition. And thinking of that same education and same outreach, while there are a number of programs out there, both state and federal, the majority of the fleets that we talked to weren't familiar with them. While they've heard of them, they weren't familiar with the details. So this kind of lends to the idea that we still need to do additional outreach, really engage the field to ensure that they know what's out there for their incentives and to make it easier in terms of the cost burden to make this transition. We wanted to break down these numbers via fleet sizes to better understand exactly how each one of these both challenges and their phases were really at for a lot of these different fleet sizes. So as I talked about previously, the smaller fleet sizes do make up the majority of the people who haven't started that planning for transition. This could be due to a combination of reasons, but likely when you're a smaller fleet, the high cost of it and the high level of effort it takes to transition may be a bit of a daunting task at the onset of it. But as we see more and more companies transition in fleets, we'll see that uptake over time. But we see larger fleets have already started to make their moves and started to make this transition happen. So it's a lot of promise on those sides. What we did notice, though, in terms of the barriers, while you would expect that 1 to 4 and some of the smaller fleets would make up the majority of what they think are the most important barriers, we saw that it's pretty evenly spread in terms of what people thought were going to be big challenges for them. We saw that grid readiness and range limitation, regardless of size, still had quite a bit of bearing on the biggest barriers that they saw. Vehicle purchase kind of ranged a little bit more, with some of the smaller fleets ranking that as one of their higher barriers. So again, the size of your fleet and how much you're going to commit to this kind of transition is very important. And so again, the continued education and outreach will be essential to making sure that we can make this transition as equitable for everyone and as easy to ensure that we can meet our deadlines. That was the survey needs that we went through in terms of those 100 survey plus surveys with the fleet operators specifically. I did want to kind of cover over some specific themes that we heard through our focus groups and our interviews. I'm going to touch on these at a very high level, just so we can go through them. So some of the big themes that we saw were funding, the electrical grid capacity, the conversation of public and private depots, where were they going to be used, conversation about timelines. So there's a lot of elements of timelines, and then equity of location. So in regards to funding, obviously we saw through not only the survey, but through our conversations with the industry, the high cost of this transition is a worry for everyone. But the continued education, the continued push by the federal and state governments to provide incentives is something that the industry very much welcomes. But we found that a lot of the smaller groups were in still of a need of not only education, but technical assistance to actually manage and run the grants that they could receive, and ensuring that these can be used by fleet sizes of all size. In terms of electrical grid capacity, there was obviously a lot of concern about that. Some of this has to do with being able to bring equipment on site. Some of it is just the worry that there's a mismatch of where available power is and where the potential site locations will be. So ensuring that we start locating our sites near where transportation is already happening or truck travel is already happening is something that was brought up when we were talking about site criteria and how do we prioritize. So ensuring that we have capacity at those locations is something the industry is concerned about and something we need to think about as we're continuing to work through these challenges. And then the idea of public versus private depots. A lot of the larger groups that we talked to and some of the bigger industries that we talked to said they were going to be able to bring private charging on site. Not surprising when you're talking about some of the larger fleets, but also important is that a lot of the smaller fleets talked about their reliance on public charging facilities and the need to have them available. So it will be really important, especially for transitioning of our smaller fleets, to have opportunities for them to charge that won't be behind the fence depot setup. So there is going to be a need and the reliance on public charging for smaller fleets, although they'll be used by all fleet sizes. And then in terms of timelines, we heard a lot of feedback about purchasing vehicles versus installation timelines, and they also how those have mismatched currently. A lot of companies and firms we've talked to were able to purchase vehicles more readily than they were able to bring charging on site, or more readily than they thought charging would be available. So making sure that we can align these timelines in the future and making sure that we can get more impetus on getting charging on site when these vehicles are purchased will be really helpful in this transition period. Additionally, there were conversations about permitting and CEQA and other types of streamlining of processes for installation and the development of charging sites. So those timelines need to be accounted for and thought through as we continue on the overall process of aligning transportation and utilities. In terms of equity of locations, a lot of the community members and a lot of industry that we talk to want to be very mindful of where they're locating and the engagement of those communities before they go in. And they thought there would be a really good opportunity to kind of mirror some of the things that they've saw with LACI, the Los Angeles Energy Incubator, and their work with the community and talking to community members as they can help inform site selection. There is the biggest concern that we were hearing, not with trucks in these disadvantaged communities, was the safety elements that were brought with it. A lot of them are worried about the idea that if you have a charging station, more trucks will be there. And regardless of how much better and how much cleaner they run, they are still trucks. They are still dangerous to the community in terms of vehicles. So that's something we're going to have to think through when we're thinking about where we're going to locate these charging sites to not overburden already burdened communities. So there's a lot of the feedback we received from our outreach to the firm. I want to just provide my contact information as well as the project manager, Anurag Kamanduri, who's the PM on the project and also at Cambridge Systematics. So thank you for allowing me to present on our findings.
Thank you so much, Sam. And if you have any questions for Sam, please drop them in the chat. I want to pass it over to Yasna already once we get our presentation back on the screen. We're running maybe just a minute or two behind, so take it away, Yasna.
Thanks, Nate. And I'm wondering, I did see one question pop up. So we're going to answer those later. Is that the hope, the plan? The question?
Yeah. Sam, can you please answer the question in the chat? And if not, we'll save it towards the end.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you for that. And I wanted to, as Watson said at the beginning, at the intro, we were switching it up a little bit. And today we wanted to invite three panelists as guest speakers here in a way that really we invited Terawatt, WattEV, and Volterra to speak about their work because it aligns very much with the surveys and with the work we're doing in Southern California and then broadly in California. So we wanted to hear, what's happening with some of these companies and their plans in terms of the investment, the opportunities, the funding for the sites they're developing. So with that, let me just introduce, we have from Volterra today, Tom Ashley, who's Vice President of Government and Utility Relations. Welcome, Tom, and thank you for joining us. And from Terawatt, we have Amelia Sibley, who's product lead of heavy duty charging, and she's very well experienced in infrastructure. Welcome, Amelia. And from WattEV, we have Salim Yusuf Sadeh, who is CEO and founder of WattEV, and welcome, Salim. Thank you for joining us all here today. The way we've organized the session is we'll have each one of them present to us really a little bit, 5 minutes or so about their company and their business cases, opportunities they're seeing. And then we'll have a conversation really with all three of them. And we invite you, everybody, our attendees, to ask questions in chat. If there's room, we'll unmute you also for a discussion. But with that, let me pass it over to Tom, who will speak to us about Volterra.
All right, thanks, Yasna. So I just have a couple visuals for us today. And really they're about both introducing Volterra to some of the folks today who may not be familiar with us or our business approach. and then you know, do have a little bit of a sneak peek of real projects, just to make sure that, you know, there is a grounded understanding that, you know, we're the collective we out there are really doing this, and, you know, not just in the planning phase. So that being said, we can just stick on this slide for a moment, Yasna and team, thanks. So some of you know, some of you don't know, Volterra just launched last August, so we're a little over a year old, and really have a little bit of an all-star cast of industry experience from a range of organizations around the industry. And I just joined, pardon me. I just joined the organization in May of this year, and so about halfway through the lifespan of Volterra to date. The business model that we're pursuing at this moment is, on the one hand, fairly simple. On the other hand, there's a lot involved with it, and that model is that we identify, secure, purchase, and develop real estate, ostensibly for EV charging, though I think many of you may have seen the announcement that Volterra made with Nikola earlier this year, around a vision for developing hydrogen fueling infrastructure for trucks. I'm not here to talk about that today, but just a flag that it's not exclusively fleet charging for Volterra at this stage. So that being said, there are really two tracks to our business, and the following slides will help illustrate those. But importantly, just from a segmentation standpoint, our customer fleet base spans from what I would describe as light duty rideshare to indeed Class 8 drayage. If we can go to the next slide. So this is a sneak peek. This is a site in Southern California that we started charging operations in September on, and we'll be making an announcement with our fleet customer, I believe in Q4 of this year, but I don't have specific timing on that. And this site is going to be supporting between 60 and 70 Class 8 trucks. You see some of the trucks pictured. And we've installed about 65 180 kW chargers for the purpose. So 65 truck charging stalls. And from an overall power standpoint, we may end up phasing to higher power chargers over time. But at this stage, this site is a bit under 10 megawatts. So if we can go to the next slide. This is a site in a different geography that is under development. It's a larger site, and at least as envisioned currently, would support multiple segments. So multiple classes of trucks, also multiple segments of bus, as well as light duty charging, really for employees and drivers working for those various fleets and or Volterra. And so I think these images are just a nice juxtaposition. In the prior one, that was a site that we developed at the direction of a fleet customer, and with a contract in hand. This one that is being showed currently is an example of where we're working ahead of fleet customers, and going through our business model, finding, buying, developing real estate for charging ahead of not just contracts, but in some cases articulated demand from the fleet segment. So we'll be happy to answer questions, but that's a very high level preview of what Volterra is working on. Thanks, Yasna.
Thank you, Tom. So just one quick question for me or clarification. Most of your sites are for private customers with developed in mind for a certain number of private customers. Does that
Indeed.
correctly?
So in the contracted customer scenario, thus far, all the sites that we've developed, they are private, and indeed they are a one-to-one. So it's just a single fleet for each of those sites. But what you see on screen is an example of where we're thinking a little bit more creatively and have a little bit more openness to potentially support some version or some amount of public access. And so that's something that we're evaluating, as are we about evaluating supporting multiple fleets to be able to access individual sites.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. And thank you for sticking to the allotted time. Appreciate that. And then from Terawatt, Amelia, can I pass it over to you to speak to us about your plans and your news, if you will?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to be with everybody. Good to see some familiar names in the group. So Terawatt Infrastructure at our core, we provide a network of charging centers specifically for commercial fleets. Our mission is to power the most electrified fleets with the most reliable network of charging centers. And that can be for light, medium, and heavy duty fleets. I'll stick to the heavy duty sector for these slides. I don't think thank you. Yeah, I'm not controlling. So we provide both the charging infrastructure and the charging services. So the infrastructure itself can be either on our own land that we acquire or on fleet's own properties or warehouses or trucking terminals. But similar to Volterra, we acquire the property, we bring the power, we develop the site, install the infrastructure, and then operate it for the long term and maintain the site, which includes technology upgrades over time, higher powered chargers, et cetera. And then our services include software that we're developing in-house, as well as operations and maintenance and a team of technical staff to ensure very high reliability, because we understand reliability has been a problem historically with public infrastructure on light duty especially. So we want to just skip that entire problem set completely and address it head on. We know that reliability is core to fleets being able to operate. Time is money. So we have to have a very high uptime, and that's part of our pitch to fleets is we can do that. So the next slide, I'm going to focus today on our on-route sites, which are the shared semi-private sites for heavy duty fleets. And these are Class 8 trucks that are operating on the road. So not yard tractors or service trucks like garbage trucks, but really Class 8 delivery trucks. We have on-route is our core site offering. And so these are shared stalls, often pull through, but also bobtail. And the idea is fleets pay for what they need to charge. So they do not need to reserve an entire stall or site, but they can simply use our sites to charge and go, similar to the way they would use a diesel fueling station today. And they can pay per kilowatt hour consumed, like a fuel charge, with a minimum utilization commitment that's based on their fleet needs. The ultra fast charging is a core part of this. So on the go charging means they have to get back on the road quickly, which requires very fast chargers. And also the trucks that can accept very fast charge, which is another core piece of this. We do not, by the way, we do not acquire, purchase or lease vehicles. We're not a truck as a service business, so we're just solely focused on the infrastructure. I should note that. And our sites are in a range of locations. So we're very dialed into site assessment considerations. We can talk about those in a minute, but we want to focus on convenience. So these sites need to be where fleets are operating already. So close to warehouses, off highways, near ports, places where fleets do not have to go out of their way to access these sites, because again, time is money for them. So we're very aware of that. And yeah, as I mentioned, these are semi-private, semi-public, however you want to call it. They're not totally open to the public, but they are shared resources. And we find that that really helps drive down the cost for each individual fleet. If they don't have a facility to electrify, or if they don't have the capital, if they lease the facility, or if they simply want a location for range extension, if they have behind the fence chargers that are lower powered and then want to tap into this across town to extend their daily mileage and routes that they can deploy EVs on, this is another way to take advantage of affordable chargers. So next slide. Some of the deeper features of these, I touched on a lot of this, but they're really, these sites are designed specifically for Class 8 trucks, both for full battery charging or top off or range extension, 350 chargers, upgrading to megawatts over time, interoperable across OEMs. So they're not designed specifically for one EV in mind, but are compatible with all the major OEMs. Pull through and bobtail stalls, drivers lounges, a reservation system to minimize wait times, good security systems, and then the ability to scale up utilization as fleets grow. We often notice how fleets want to deploy 1 or 2 trucks initially, test, pilot, and then increase the size of their EV fleet over time. But it's difficult to plan your infrastructure build out when you're scaling up. You don't necessarily know what that final solution is going to need. So these shared charging stations are also useful for fleets who want to start small and then add more fleets into the mix over time without having to pay for the full solution up front. And then lastly, I included on the last side, yes, thanks. Oh yeah, one more on our map. So we're focused, we have sites in 19 states that are under various degrees of development, but Southern California is of course a nexus of a lot of activity. So we focused development in this Southern California region. These 4 sites are all owned and under development. And our Rancho Dominguez site, which is 10 miles north of the port of Long Beach, is having its groundbreaking in 2 days. So that's a very exciting moment for us to finally put shovels in the ground. So that will be coming online mid next year, and is the one that we announced with Pepsi. I'm getting sped up, I can see. Okay, site assessment considerations, a few things we can talk through in more depth as well in the Q&A, but these are some of the elements that we think through when we're deciding where to build and when to develop. So it's a 2-part decision for us, where to build and then also when to actually turn a piece of dirt into a full-blown trucking solution. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And I was just going to ask you, very useful to see the map and to have you speak to the opening. At least, and impressive to hear that you have sites in development in 19 locations. Is that what I heard, or 19 states? What did I hear?
19 states is the extent of our portfolio of properties. And then the ones we develop is a smaller subset of that based on market readiness and other factors.
Yeah. The other sites that we saw, at least on the map on Southern California and California specifically, because this e-truck project is focused on California, any sort of years or quarters of years that you could speak to the Rialto, Fontana, or any other in California?
Yeah, Rialto should be 2024 as well, and then Fontana and Commerce more 2025 timeframes. And then we have light duty sites that are also coming online this year, but and next year, but it's a separate fleet focus. So.
All right. Well,
and then our I-10 down below, our I-10 corridor, I didn't mention that, but that is also coming online in the next couple of years.
Okay. Okay, good to hear. Good to hear. Thank you. Thank you for the slides and the information, and we'll have a little more in a discussion piece. Let me pass it over to Salim now from Wadi to tell us about their business model and what they're looking at or how their business model has evolved. So
Sure. Thanks so much. So there's going to be probably a lot of overlap with what we've already heard, but there's quite a few differences that WattEV offers that really we believe makes it a lot easier for the owner operators to transition. So WattEV was started several years ago with the goal of accelerating the transition to heavy duty transport. So if we go to the next slide, these are just some of the feature sets that we all seen before. I mean, 10% of the trucking industry is, or most of the total miles traveled, 10% of that is made up of Class 8 trucks, which is 30% of the emissions. A lot of the shippers have sustainability goals that they want to help offset with some sort of zero emissions offerings. And then there's obviously on the government side, mandates and incentives that we've seen that are helping and pushing towards zero emissions transitions. So on the next slide, what WattEV offers is really more of a full ecosystem level approach where we offer everything from the infrastructure to truck as a service with a simple solution to really help both shippers and carriers electrify freight as easy as possible. So on the charging infrastructure side, we do both behind the fence charging as well as public charging. All of our sites are built with the future in mind. So we have 360 kilowatt chargers going in the ground, either sites that are already open or opening soon, as well as technology that offers true dynamic charging with both CCS and megawatt charging MCS technology as that becomes available. We've created our own EVSE manufacturing subsidiary towards that actually, so that we have a lot more control of the costs of the equipment as well as the product life cycle. So Charge America, that's our charging subsidiary that offers the next generation technology that's going into all of our sites that has both megawatt and CCS charging. On the truck as a service side, we know that a majority of the industry is made up of owner operators. These are smaller fleets that can't necessarily afford infrastructure behind the fence charging, or can afford a truck that is 4 times that of a new diesel truck. And so we really tested the capabilities of these trucks, created our own transport company to work with shippers, testing the routes within the network, and be able to give the best offering to owner operators where they can transition very easily to a zero emissions truck without any of the headaches on routes that we've already tested with customers that we know are willing to have their loads moved with zero emissions trucks. And that's where you see that the supply chain solutions come into effect as well. We've been running freight for Fortune 500 shippers since last year, putting hundreds of thousands of miles on these trucks, testing the performance, the capabilities of all of the different manufacturers to see how they perform in different conditions to really offer the best solution for both the shippers and the carriers. On the next slide, you'll see our Port of Long Beach depot. This is the first one of our sites to go online. This is a site located right within the Port of Long Beach compounds. It's about 1.5 acres with 26, ability to charge 26 trucks at once. The main users of this site are our truck as a service customers, as well as valet charging that we started offering. So these are customers that have bought electric trucks, but underestimated how long it may take to get infrastructure in the ground. And they've come to us with, asking for a need. And our solution has been to give them more of a valet service where they can domicile their vehicles at our location. We manage the charge cycle, the sessions, and then they come to a fully charged truck at the start of their next shift. And then lastly, the opportunity chargers where anyone can come in, show up, scan our QR code, and be able to charge as well. This site is 5 megawatts of capacity in the first phase. The next phase would include more charging dispensers as well as MCS dispensers with pull-through availability. This is actually the smallest of the sites that we have. This is only about 1.5 acres. A lot of our other sites are much larger, as well as offer some sorts of different technology like distributed energy resources, where we can tap into solar and microgrids where power may be limited or may take years to get to those locations. The next slide goes through, again, the evolution of the company and where we're going. So we've gone through, getting our first sites online. There's several others coming online this year in the Southern California region, as well as a pipeline of sites going all the way up to Northern California and eastbound along the I-10 corridor. We've done pilots with name brand shippers to really come together with the best offering for both shippers and the carriers. And then we're also very heavily pushing on the MCS side. So, I mean, on the technology side, we have MCS charging going through UL certification right now, so that we'll be able to start installation of those chargers as soon as early next year. And then working with a lot of the truck manufacturers towards seeing what it takes to actually get MCS into the trucks themselves and be able to test those vehicles. By the end of this year, we'll have the first 4 depots online, and then 50 plus depots by 2025. The next slide gives you more of a geographical map of the infrastructure that we're putting out. So Long Beach is our first to go online. This year, we'll also have San Bernardino, Gardena, and Bakersfield online. We also have another charging site that was fairly quick to come online in Moreno Valley that we're using at the customer's distribution center. So that's one case where the site already had power and was very quick and easy for us to actually get chargers into that facility and running. And then, as mentioned, we are very much focused on electrifying key corridors. So we've got sites already under contract and in the works going all the way up to Sacramento, as well as close to Moreno Valley on the border of San Diego and Mexico, and then electrifying on the I-10 going eastbound. And then the last slide is really, again, our differentiation based on what we've heard so far. And I think the biggest differentiation is just how vertically integrated we've become, right? So we offer a full ecosystem level approach of infrastructure plus the trucks plus routes that we've already tested, so that we can give the best offering to both shippers and carriers and help them electrify without any of the headaches or the barriers. And I believe that's the last slide. Thank you, guys.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm just getting notes from my team that we could extend our discussion to 11:20, which is welcome because we're at 11 o'clock already. Thank you all 3 for presenting such wonderful slides. And I know I asked you to present some maps and timelines, and you all did, and it's actually impressive. I'm excited about what we're seeing and what might be ahead of us. And if you want us to switch to any of your slides, we don't have to look at the LA buildings here all the time. We can swap in any of your slides. But let me ask you a couple of questions. As you're developing these sites, one question that we're curious, and Sam presented in the survey, sort of how are you looking, or when you speak with fleets, there's the depot, there's the shared public, shared private, the semi-public, semi-private. How smaller fleets specifically seem to be relying on public charging sites in order to transition. How does the dynamic of small fleets, medium fleets, big fleets, and their different needs inform your site development plans and types of users you're anticipating at the sites? And maybe I'll start with Amelia, you. But all 3 of you can chime in or not, as you like, but I'm picking on you now, Amelia.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, our sites are designed and structured to be usable and valuable to small fleets as well as large fleets. I think, as I mentioned, the shared stall concept and only paying for the kilowatt hours you need allows smaller fleets to avoid that very burdensome upfront capital investment of behind the fence charging infrastructure installation. So they can just tap into existing infrastructure, use what they need and reduce their budget accordingly. It also moves that budget from a CapEx expense to an OpEx expense, which is a lot more, we've heard, affordable and accessible to smaller fleets. So that is one way structurally we're set up to support smaller fleets. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Good. Salim, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into our site selection criteria and the amount of energy and resources that we put on that site. Obviously, we want all of our sites to be built to scale so that as demand increases, we can offer more chargers and more capacity at that facility. But really, usually the conversation starts with shippers. These are the ones that have the lanes, and we want to test those lanes to make sure that we can move them effectively with electric trucks, and then give those offerings to owner operators through our truck as a service platform. But really, I mean, every time we come across a site, we look at, you know, how large is the site, the price or the lease rate of the facility, how much power is available, and then, you know, what the utilization would be, as well as the grant funding resources. So there's a lot of metrics that all have to sort of work in parallel and move every time we come across a site and start development of that site.
Excellent. And you offer, obviously, also maybe to the small fleets, sort of the trucks as a service if they so desire.
Correct.
Is that right? Sort of as a one package or separate?
Correct.
package?
Yeah. So it's a separate offering. So we offer the truck all inclusive of the vehicle maintenance, damage insurance, and the charging at a fixed price per month. But really, I mean, we've come across owner operators that have their own routes, so they'll just come to us and say, we've got a truck and we'll do our own routes. But there's also owner operators that, you know, either on the spot market or are looking for routes, and we can offer assistance there with, you know, the shippers that we've already worked with to come and say, okay, these are routes that we know can work with the electric trucks, and that way they already have a sort of guaranteed or known revenue that they would be making.
Okay. Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, so a little bit of a different story for Volterra thus far anyway. We've really been focusing on identifying and contracting with fleet customer partners who we think need significant scale of deployment. So yes, we're operating in California, but we're also operating, buying sites, developing sites in many, many other markets in the US. And so in that scenario, again, it's one fleet for one site. And that's been really important for us, you know, from a business development, revenue foundation, et cetera, standpoint. But for the track where we're working ahead of fleets, I would say we're also emphasizing with the data inputs, assessments, et cetera, that we're doing, looking for larger fleets who might be able to contract one fleet per one site. But I think we're more open to aggregating fleets and providing access to smaller operators. So the demand of the smaller operators is not currently driving our real estate acquisition and site development, but I think we're very optimistic about being able to serve them. And indeed, in the truck space, we are focusing on locations that are very proximate to the main travel corridors, you know, at this stage, particularly in Southern California. So we think those are quite relevant for a range of different fleet demographics.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm going to I see in chat a good question from my colleague, Jesse Lund, and I'm going to piggyback on it a little bit. Shippers, we talked about fleets. My question was fleets, but I know some of you mentioned that you do interact with shippers. Shippers often, some of them have some fleets and some of them have absolutely no vehicles of their own, right? Their own fleet. Can you speak about how you have been engaging with shippers and how they're informing you, as well as are any of the shippers potentially paying or financing sites for their carriers specifically? And whoever wants to raise their hand first, go ahead.
Sure, happy to get into that. What we've actually seen is that, you know, even though there's all these mandates and incentives that are somewhat forcing truckers to start using electric trucks, a lot of the conversations start with the shippers, and they're actually the drivers that are pushing the industry, not because of mandates, but because of their own sustainability goals that they have. And there are shippers that, as you mentioned, have their own fleets, like a Walmart or an Amazon, for instance, but there's also a lot of shippers that contract a lot of their routes out and depend on owner operators to move freight for them. And some of those shippers or warehouses are very reluctant to add any infrastructure behind the fence. They'd much rather just have, you know, very little change in their day-to-day and just have that load be moved with zero emissions. The conversation that we do have with them is that it often needs to have flexibility or change in how they've typically been operating. An example of that is, you know, in our preference, we prefer a drop and hook rather than a live load unload. So what that means is that a truck comes into a shipper's facility, and rather than waiting for that container to be filled up or empty, they can just pick up a fully loaded container and be on their way. So that's one metric where we go to the shippers and say, do you have any flexibility on the loads, or do you have any flexibility on the schedules where we can enter or leave the gates? And then start working with them, identify the routes that they have within the entire Southern California region and see which ones we can electrify, and then work towards getting a contract for those routes and start moving them with the zero emissions trucks.
Great. Amelia or Tom? You're muted, Amelia.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll add, we're also working closely with shippers as well and find a similar thing where carriers who are being asked to electrify essentially say, well, look, are we going to be getting paid more to haul this freight from the shipper? You know, there's this ecosystem question of how can all parties work together to share this burden of transitioning to electric trucks, and that includes the shippers. And then working directly with shippers for their own fleets as well. So we announced with Pepsi, Pepsi has signed up to use our site north of the Port of Long Beach. They have a facility nearby in Torrance that simply does not have the space to accommodate charging behind the fence. And so they found it much more convenient to deploy their trucks to come charge at our facility to do their daily routes. And that works for them because it's shorter haul, grocery, essentially food and beverage delivery. So it's 50 miles or less. It fits with the range of the EVs today and the charging times they need to charge on the go. So as those charger speeds accelerate, that will increase the available routes they can take with those trucks and charging. But shippers, yes, absolutely a core part of the equation.
And let me just, the second part of the question was, are any shippers, are you finding they're financing some of the charging infrastructure needed for their carriers? I guess I could ask the shippers that, but I'm asking you guys whether you had those interactions. That, like, not naming any particular XYB, the shipper would say, hey, I will finance the infrastructure so that my carriers can have the ability to drive an electric.
Yeah, I think for us, that's an ongoing conversation. It's something we're exploring, but it's sort of a next level aspect to this ecosystem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tom, anything to add?
Yeah, maybe just on that last point, you know, and I had a fair amount of exposure to, you know, the delivery or freight movement space before I joined Volterra. I would say there is opportunity for the shippers or, you know, the Fortune 500s to be more involved in helping electrify the ISPs or carriers that, you know, are actually moving the goods, et cetera, that are part of their operation. I would say that to date, a lot of the carriers have been a bit on their own, but on the other hand, I think we're getting closer to a point where, you know, the Fortune 500s in this space will require, not as a nice to have, but as a need to have their carriers electrify. And I think that's going to create a little bit more of a forcing function, some of which we're already seeing the start of with the go live of ACF, that carriers either will bear the burden themselves and make that work, or they will demand some level of support from the companies they're working for.
No, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more on that. For the next question, and I know we'll have about 5 more minutes or so, I wanted to combine 2 questions in terms of building out sites and what that looks like. So we heard in the survey that Sam was presenting, there was concern about electrical grid capacity and the barrier that presents, and I'd like you to address that. But also, what other things, challenges at sites, such as equipment delays or streamlining timelines, any best practices? So I would like you to consider sort of what are the barriers, both from grid capacity and equipment, construction, getting a site to become, from the time you, let's say you acquired the land, but from acquiring the land to building it out. Maybe if you could speak to some solutions, not just the barriers, but the solutions that you are implementing on a daily basis, or on a, when you're building this.
Yes, I'm happy to start maybe.
Please.
So to be pretty direct, because we're buying property, we do not do that until we have adequate confidence in the power delivery timeline and cost, as well as, in our case, the land use approval process. So in many cases, municipalities are having to either interpret existing code to enable some version of charging as a primary use, or in other cases, they're actually having to amend their code to develop a new use. So I do want to acknowledge there's definitely a land use component of this process, certainly for Volterra. On the power delivery side, this is a challenge. I do want to acknowledge, though, big picture, Volterra's view is the grid has adequate capacity, or will have, but the distribution system definitely has locational constraints. And so again, that's part of our process, and indeed part of why we've gained a lot of traction with our customers, because some have existing sites that do have distribution system bottlenecks and barriers to electrifying. I'll just say, in terms of, say, charging equipment, everyone knows there's a fair lead time on that, and we do as well. And so we're ordering equipment pretty early on in our process, so that is not affecting our project delivery timeline. But the area of equipment that is utility equipment. So in some cases, utilities will allow us or customers to buy certain aspects of that equipment, including transformers, switchgear, et cetera. In other cases, they won't. And depending on the equipment and how much the utility is otherwise ordering that, or it's being produced, that is a bit of a bottleneck that we're seeing. And we're working with the utility community and regulators to help enable more forward planning and investment by utilities in this regard. But to be frank, there's a bit of blocking and tackling, if you will, working with our utility partners to really encourage them to order as quickly as possible, so that that's not a controlling milestone in project delivery.
Good. Thank you. Amelia or Celine, any good solutions you have been relying on?
Yeah, so similarly, power availability is part of our site selection criteria. So we will not buy a site if there is not power available, and we do the early due diligence to identify available capacity and phase in power as it becomes available as well. So we can bring in 3 megawatts to start and then go up to 10 and then 30 even if we need it. We also enhance sites with temp power microgrids, so grid tied batteries or load control strategies, different ways to make do with the power we have that is available and can be scrappy in that way to try to bring chargers to the site before the full solution is built out. But essentially, we try to take a portfolio view of site development, so deploying equipment to those most in-demand sites first and aligning that with where fleets want charging by when, so that the equipment isn't a bottleneck, and try to have good relationships with best suppliers and take the long view to make sure that we're ordering equipment early enough so that it's not the long pole in the tent. But it's certainly a challenge for the industry, so it's something we have to manage, and we try to. That's again why we want to take the burden away from fleets to not have to deal with this.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Salim, I
Yeah.
think I've heard you with some similar innovative solutions of how to bring power or make more out of what's there.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, there's obviously going to be sites that or quarters that you find that need charging infrastructure but don't have power. And you know, similar to what others mentioned, we work very closely with the utilities to see how much power is available prior to getting a site. But if power, you know, is not available or it takes time, is a microgrid a solution? So Bakersfield, for instance, is one of those examples where we have 115 acres to work with, and 100 acres of that is going to be dedicated to solar, which comes out to about 25 megawatts of nameplate capacity, or about the ability to charge 200 trucks per day. But we're not going to be installing all 25 megawatts at once. The first phase of that project is only 5 megawatts with 6 or 15 CCS chargers attached to them. And then as the demand increases, we'd be adding more solar generation. We're also working with the utility over there to have backup power from the grid. There's also been cases that I've heard where there's some customers that are looking at alternatives or temp power solutions like generators or CNG generators to power the chargers, at least in the meantime, until power becomes available. On the equipment procurement side, again, start those conversations with the utilities early. Don't be afraid to go out and look for different solutions and challenge the status quo. I mean, we've seen switchgear procurement be a topic of concern, but when we do our own analysis and actually look at purchase orders, typical time frame that I've seen is about 10 to 16 weeks. And I don't think that constitutes an answer to come and say it's a supply chain constraint.
Well, listen, I thought we'd have more time, but you know, good conversations never have enough time. This was super interesting to me. Don't be surprised if we invite you again for updates. Our ITAC project continues. We want you as active members, and I will invite our attendees to also put questions in chat. So don't be strangers. Thank you again very much, Amelia, Salim, and Tom, for a good discussion and good updates. I've learned a lot, and I hope our ITAC members have as well.
Thank you.
Thank you
for having us.
All right, so Tuan and Nate, I'll pass it back to you, but please do put questions in chat and we will get them answered one way or another.
Thanks, Yasna, and thanks again to our panelists. We're just bringing back our presentation up and we can continue on with e-truck updates. Thanks, Gia. So I'll pass it over to you, Ken.
Thanks, Nate. All right, I'm just going to run through some more details on our Advanced Transportation Research Center, which is focused on the high-powered charging lab at SE's Pomona facility, and then our 2 pilot sites, and then I'll pass it on to Liz to talk through a report, a joint report we published for the truck OEMs and tier 1 perspectives on high powered charging. So Watson mentioned one of the updates here is with the lab that we're building out as part of eTruck in partnership with SCE. We have all the key site test equipment that we've ordered delivered. This includes all the DC emulators, AC emulators, and the charge discovery system. We're splitting this up into 2 phases. The first phase is more of a lower powered testing phase. So we're taking in applications right now and working towards opening up the phase 1 of that lab by the end of this year. With the first phase, we'll still be able to, do testing on EVSEs and electric vehicles. So you can still do functional testing, conformance, interoperability testing. But the availability for medium voltage and MCS testing, that's going to be in phase 2, which is in the summer of 2024. So there's a link to the website below for the latest updates. You'll also find an intake application in that link. So while we're doing the installation and commissioning of the equipment throughout the rest of this quarter, we'll also be reviewing applications alongside with SCE for applicants as well to use the lab starting next year. And then moving on to the pilot sites. So just quick updates. I would say we're in the phase right now where we're simultaneously doing an early procurement process, getting a better idea of lead times and quotes from vendors for long lead time items. We're still seeing switchboards taking about 35 to 40 weeks, depending on the vendor. In addition to that, we're having early conversations with the electrical equipment and EVSEs and energy storage vendors as well. And all this is happening while we're doing the early phases of our engineering design as well. And part of this is supply chain issues and just getting ahead of being able to move forward with these projects and get these stations and equipment in the ground as quickly as possible. Same thing with the PA site. We're having conversations with vendors for a CCS and MCS unit and working actively with Tony and team over at TA to ensure that, we address all these long lead time items and make sure that, we're going to be ready to have equipment in the ground by the time they start construction on their site. And with that, I will pass it. Oh yeah, timeline, sorry. Timeline wise, we're aiming for early Q4 2024 for both of these sites to go live as of right now. With that, I'll pass it on to Liz.
Thanks, Ken. So for the sake of time, I will breeze through the slides. So as mentioned previously by Watson, we have now published 2 reports that are available on the eTruck website. So one of them being the joint tier 1 and OEM company perspectives on high power charging. So you may, as ITAC members, have reviewed kind of separately on one side the OEM and the other the tier 1 supplier interview surveys findings, and so we have combined kind of the findings of both these interviews in order to get a holistic picture of the heavy duty truck manufacturing market, from the component to the truck manufacturing side of things, and so this has allowed us to kind of assess technology maturity of MCS charging. Some of the key takeaways here. So by combining these interviews, we do see a kind of unified industry direction and a consensus among the OEMs and tier 1 suppliers towards adopting MCS by 2030. So we have a few statistics here for you. 2/3 of the OEMs interviews plan to integrate MCS by 2030. Similarly, with the tier 1 suppliers, they are all either monitoring or developing these charging systems, with some prototypes in the making as well. So although we are in the early stages of prototypes, both kind of the suppliers and the manufacturers are predicting that MCS will join the market by 2030. So I invite you to read the full report if you are interested in the details of MCS technology readiness. We also have a fact sheet available on the link below here on this slide. Thank you very much. Back to you, Nate.
Thanks, Liz. So next steps for this Industry Technology Advisory Committee. ITAC feedback on the draft industry outreach memo. If you could please have that by November 14, email any additional feedback on the Advanced Transportation Research Center, ATRC, to Ken, kenlin@epri.com. And then if you're interested in joining subcommittees to discuss specific research topic areas for high power EVSE systems, email me and Fernandez@calstart.org. Any additional feedback on anything that we've discussed today or the project in general, email to me as well. And you'll be receiving follow-up email with the meeting summary notes and a recording of this presentation. Next slide, please.
And I would just add, Nate, this is Watson here. Just email us at any of these addresses if you have for future ITAC meetings, you have topics that you'd like to be covered, suggested panelists, anything along those lines. Please email us, contact us, call us. We'll make ourselves available.
Good point, Watson. So here is all of our contact information, all of our emails. And lastly is just thank you for participating today. Thanks again to our panelists, and maybe I'll open it up to any of our internal project members to give some closing comments.
I had a quick question about next meeting.
Sure.
Is it planned already?
I'm pretty sure we have a date. Let me check our eTruck website because that's where it should be for the next ITAC meeting.
We have the date set for next year, but they have not been sent out yet. So we'll follow up after with the final quarterly meeting dates for next year.
Right. So we're still quarterly meeting. This is it for the year. I guess that was what I was asking. Yep. Okay. Thanks.
It is quarterly. I will just emphasize we are always inviting people to either meet up with us individually or send us comments, questions. We want, engagement between meetings as well. Well, thank you all from me. I enjoyed today's presentation, and if you have comments on that, happy to hear, and happy to take ideas in terms of making it a useful, lively, and practical discussion. But it was good for me personally, and I think for the project as well, especially to understand how the public funding that we are really focusing on this project interacts with some of the private funding that's happening, and that alignment and coordination, rather, I think is very helpful. So that's all. Thank you, and happy to engage, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. This was great. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Excellent.
Thanks, Lauren.